Hello everybody, I'm John Axdorf from Brooklyn Radio's Stars Over Surrey, and welcome to my Constellation of the Month. So let's go over to my laptop and I'll take you through some details of the constellation. So here we are at the laptop having a look at a representation of the part of the night sky that contains my constellation of the month for January. So there's a good clue right in the centre of the screen. You've got a sort of a V shape on its side. That ought to give you a good idea as to what this constellation might be. Let's fill in that V and the other lines that join the stars that make up that constellation. There we go. I'm sure you've got it by now. It's Taurus, Taurus the bull. That's what they think it represented, the bull. Okay, so let's go over to the old Brook Bond T cards to see what they say. And there you see the two open clusters that are the significant points of this constellation in terms of easily identifying it. We've got the V shape here of the Hyades. And over here, a smaller, tighter group of stars of similar magnitude called the Pleiades, or as they're more commonly known, the Seven Sisters. Often people call them that. Aldebaran is the name of the prime star of the constellation, a red giant. And that is over here. And forms the end of one of the arms of the V. On the card itself, the text card, you'll see a little bit about the fable. The Pleiades are the seven daughters of Atlas, and they are turned to stars with their sisters, the Hyades. So Atlas clearly had lots and lots of children. And the name Aldebaran means follower, as you'll see. Okay, let's go and find out where to find it in the night sky. But first of all, let me remind you of some of the constellations that we've been looking at over the last few months. Over here, we've got the square of Pegasus, the winged horse. And over here, the W that marks Cassiopeia, the mother of Andromeda, who is down here. And Andromeda was saved from the beast by the hero Perseus, who is here. So it's just near Perseus's feet that we can find the V that marks up the bull. So there is Taurus in the south, quite high, during the month of January in early to mid-evening. Let's look inside and see what objects we have in Taurus. As per usual, I'll start with our Messier objects. Now, the very first object in Messier's catalogue was this one. He'd seen it, realised it wasn't a comet, and in fact knew that somebody else had already labelled it as some kind of a cloud, a nebula. It's actually called the Crab Nebula, and I'll talk about that again in just a few minutes. The next of the Messier objects comes in at number 45 on his list, and that is the Pleiades. So even if you didn't know that you'd be looking at the Messier object, you can tick that one off your list if you're going to start going for all of the Messiers. Now, the other open cluster, the Hyades, also features on the list, but not on Messier's. He knew that that was not a fuzzy patch in the sky that could perhaps be a comet. No, he realised that was an open cluster. But Patrick Moore, with his Caldwell catalogue, thought it was worth an entry. So that came in at number 41 on the Caldwell list, an open cluster. But before we go, there's a couple of other objects that I'd like to point you towards in the constellation, and those are some nice double stars. The first one is Theta. So Theta can be found next to Aldebaran in the V of the bull. And as you'll see, the two components of the double star are very similar in magnitude, 3.2 and 3.8, and reasonably widely separated, so easily seen within a pair of binoculars, as can be Kappa Tauri, which is up here, just a little bit above the V. Just scan across the sky, leave the V behind you, just go up just a little bit and you'll come to Kappa. One just a little bit brighter than the other. One at mag 4.2, the other at 5.3. Okay, so here's the Crab Nebula. Now, of course, it doesn't look like that through my telescope or most other telescopes. That is a Hubble type image. But it shows the fantastic intricacy and detail of what was a huge explosion when a star ended its life and blew up in what we call a supernova. Now that supernova happened, of course, a long time ago. As you can see, it's 6,500 light years away. But that light reached us from the explosion in the year 1054, which was when Chinese astronomers recognized this as a star that hadn't been there before, and they recorded its appearance and how long it lasted, when it faded and disappeared. Somewhere in there is a pulsar, which is the tiny remnant of what's left of the core of that star that blew itself apart. Let's move on to the next Messier object, which is M45. Now, with a good pair of binoculars or a small telescope, that's approaching how you would see the Pleiades. It's called the Seven Sisters, but most people can see 5 or 6 stars there with the naked eye. But just turn binoculars on there, you'll see scores. There's actually, I think, about 200 altogether members of that cluster. But you would need a larger scope to see some of the fainter ones. Now, by the way, you'll notice that there is some cloudy material around some of these stars. Now, that's not the clouds of gas from which these stars formed. It just happens to be a cloud of gas that these stars are passing through. They're all gravitationally bound still from being born in the same area and moving through space and have just encountered this gas. And by reflection, the gas is illuminated by the light of the stars. You won't actually see that with the naked eye, with either the naked eye or binoculars. It does take a long exposure and a camera attached to a telescope to bring out that detail of the nebula surrounding them. And the last object, of course, was the Hyades, and you don't need a binocular set or a telescope to see those. You've seen them with the naked eye, I'm sure. But if you do turn binoculars onto them, you'll see it's not just the half a dozen or so stars that you can see with the naked eye forming that V. There's a lot more, as can be seen in this image. Okay, so there you have it, my constellation of the month for January. Do get out there, do go and find it, and I hope you'll enjoy what you see. Bye till next month.